So do you think that for people who are really strong-headed and becoming allies, who really want to be that ally, you know, what are the steps that they can take? Are they supposed to take interest in something that they find meaningful in the change of allyship? For instance, you know, getting into a political position on something, helping different organization. What are some options that they might have where they feel that, okay, I have energy, I have time, and I want to give?
Well, again, let me tell you what that doesn't look like, because we saw some of this in the 70s and 80s where people started wearing dashikis and braiding their hair and, you know, trying to assume a posture of blackness when they weren't, and it wasn't theirs, and it wasn't real, and it wasn't sustainable, right? But one of the things that we all can do is continue to celebrate. We can celebrate each other's holidays. We can celebrate each other's faith. Um, I'll talk about Juneteenth another time, but the, the real date is January 1st, 1863. Um, that's an Independence Day that we really should be celebrating. But let's make sense of the celebrations in each other's communities and have a chance. So again, we're not clothed in this appearance of Black Lives Matter as a slogan. Black Lives Matter because we do understand history, because we do understand the pain and the racism and some of the continued oppressions that do exist when it comes to healthcare and academic achievement, you know, and even access to jobs and loans and things. And so it matters when we see people clothing themselves in a I'll call it a higher plane of righteousness, that justice is for all. If justice is for all, and the imperfections in all of our systems are being challenged, so we're not anti-police. We are for proper law enforcement and justice in our society, and the fairness of judges and the fairness of doctors and others to preserve all lives, not just some lives. So it's those kinds of actions that I would promote, because people are in different spaces with different spheres of influence, different levels of education and skills and talents. Use those platforms as learning opportunities. As you said, the Adams Center is doing. Invite people in to speak. Invite people in to share. Make yourself willing to go out and share about opportunities in your space. I've been getting a lot of calls recently, and this is wonderful for the Freedom Center as it relates to grant opportunities and things that we may be in line for to help our mission. That didn't happen as frequently 2 years ago. I thank people for their generosity of information, and we are responding. But those are the kinds of things that allies engage in. It's not just purposeful for their mission, it could be purposeful for ours, so share and partner and help. But there's a lot, obviously, and I talked about the intergenerational piece before, because this is generational work. This isn't this year or next year. That we, you know, I have my 18-year-old grandson just graduated from high school, and we've had many conversations about the world as it exists today. And I have 3 sons and a daughter who are also older and, you know, fearful of their children and impact and their messages and where they go and, you know, who they relate to. And they have a more of a, I guess, broader relationship with friends. And some elements of disappointment that some of those friends are not allies, and they're fighting with those friends on social media and standing up for Black Lives Matter, and now being called somewhat anti-American with someone that they had valued for 3 or 4 years of their high school experience. So they're also learning painful lessons, and it's how to keep them engaged without losing them because of the actions of a few. And that's the other strength of true allyships and partnerships, is that we don't lose generations, we don't go to the extremes of hate and violence, and that we find a middle ground where we can work. And that middle ground is actually where most of us live anyway. We don't live on the fringes. And so it gives us an opportunity to have these helpful conversations like we are today. And I've had probably too many times in my lifetime over the years of this kind of work, but I'm not tired yet.
One thing that I think Rabbi Susan can agree with me is that a lot of the conversation we've been having in the faith circle is people who have been active, from the 60s till now, saying how the demonstrations and the protests have changed in terms of who's actually coming. So back then there weren't that many allies from different backgrounds. Now there are much more, right? Do you think that that is something that's part of the positive movement that's happening?
But I think that's reflective of many movements over, the last 30 or 40 years, right? It used to be just the civil rights, but somehow civil rights weren't equal rights for women, yet they were. And so, I mean, we've seen the evolution of many movements and organizations that cause us just on a spectrum. And I think I go back and I look at Malcolm X and what he found out when he went to Mecca, is that there was a rainbow coalition of Muslims, and not what he thought he was taught. So who represents, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people? We all do, all faith, all religions, all colors. What type of woman doesn't deserve equal rights? Well, every woman, on every level. And so we're finding that, culturally, faith-wise, intergenerationally, we all represent all of these things. And so it is now more common to see all of our communities broader represented, because we are, and probably always have been.
It's so interesting too to think about and to reflect on how social media has impacted and helped to have a broader spectrum engaged. As we were discussing, and I was sharing earlier before we started, we had in our community, in our town, in Montgomery County, a couple of neighbors who said, you know what, we want to do something. We're not going down to the big rally, the big protest, because they were feeling with, we're still in this age of pandemic and coronavirus, and not wanting to be around crowds, but still also wanting to make sure within our own neighborhood that there was a sense and a recognition that there's a community of support and love and allyship. And so a couple of friends sent an email and actually posted something on Facebook. Would people we're planning to do this candlelight vigil. And they gave the route, they told people where to meet, and had no idea if it was just going to be the two families and tons of people showed up, and which felt good, recognizing that there were people up and down the street and around the neighborhood who were feeling the same way and felt like we need to see, and we need to be seen, and we want to see our neighbors and show that we care about this issue. And they started a Facebook page, and as I was saying, there are probably just over 300 people on that now. And out of these conversations, there was just a second walk this past weekend. But out of these conversations, people started asking about the street names in the neighborhood. There are several streets named for Confederate generals. And clearly those come from a time when the neighborhood was built in the early 60s, where that was a statement, and that expressed the values that the people establishing the neighborhood, or people building the neighborhood, who was in and who was not wanted in the community. And those were values perhaps of a time, but they don't reflect the values of the community. They don't reflect the values of Montgomery County. And so this was raised and brought to the county council, and we had a couple of council members at our walk this weekend who shared that the county council, everyone has signed on to do a comprehensive study in Montgomery County, looking at street names, looking at monuments, etc., but to understand and recognize that we stand together. And I think that's something that a lot of people want to say and are not sure how to say it, or to whom they should say it. And I think that showing up is such can mean a lot to those who are, not sure if their neighbors are standing with them. So we might be across the river from each other, but we are side by side, and we stand together. And I think that that's so important, that for those of our listeners who are wondering, do I have to be a politician? How can I get involved? Find a walk, there are places to show up where just being able to have that sense of connection to those who care about the face of this country. And Ron, you said it so beautifully. It's, I know, shared in all of our faith traditions, that we're all created, as we say in the book of Genesis, the B'Tselem Elohim, we're all created B'Tselem Elohim in the image of God. We might not all look alike, but there is divinity within each one of us, and within each other's faces, we see reflected the face of God. And so it's important for us to show up and to see each other and to make sure that everyone is seen and that everyone is heard.